Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting for August 5th, 2024. I will now call this meeting to order. And Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Schultz.
Here.
Latta.
Here.
Cruz.
Here.
Hawbaker.
Here.
Gienfield.
Here.
Chrisman.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
All members present.
Madam Clerk, and we'll move to item number 1, discussion on the future planning of the current Cedar Falls High School site and the Mercy One Cedar Falls Medical Center, formerly Sartori site. We've got a presentation from Director Sheets, and we are not looking for any formal action on this, so just kind of an update presentation on where we're at.
All right. Good evening, everyone. As the mayor said, this is an informational presentation following up on our referral in March from the council to talk about these two areas in town. A little bit of background first. The new high school is building out on West 27th, and that calls into question kind of what's going to be happening at the old high school site. I don't know if calling them new and old is appropriate, but I guess that's what we'll go with. So the future of the Division Street property had been unknown until recently. I think there's still a formal decision to make, but at this point we're hearing that it will remain an educational institution there. So there may be less to talk about tonight or less information there, but I'll still go through it just so that we know the lay of the land on both of these sites. A new hospital has been discussed, but the timeline is unknown. And so then we had the referral just to give, I think, some basic information to the council, maybe as a little bit of an elevator speech if people are asking you questions so that you can help answer those. And then finally, in our capital improvement plan, we do have in fiscals 26 and 27 to be working on a vision plan and then follow that up with zoning work as we've been trying to hopefully get to revisiting our zoning in all areas of town. This would be the next one on the list currently in the CIP in that time frame. So to get right into it, Cedar Falls High School site on Division Street there is approximately 16 acres. It is owned by the school district. It's bordered there, Division Street on the east, and on the south is 12th Street, and on the north is 8th Street. The current zoning of the property is R1, and that allows uses such as 1 and 2 unit dwellings, churches, schools, recreational areas, that type of thing, a couple other types of uses. We also look at when, as the council knows, we look at our future land use map. If we have a proposal to make a change, this is a guiding document for us that's adopted in our comprehensive plan. And so the future land use map for this location identifies it as a school. Those blue colors are pretty similar, but since we have a lighter blue shade right next to it, we can clearly see Civic is to the south, that's the cemetery, and to the north there is the schools. So that is what's in our future land use map, and that would guide if we had a question about possibly rezoning it or using it differently. We'd have to think about what is called for there. And so in our future land use map, we have some residential categories. Again, this is maybe not as necessary to go over with this site, but I have the slide in there anyway. What does our plan mean when it says low, medium, high density? So I indicated, just so that it was a little bit more legible, the typical density range. That's straight from the comprehensive plan, just so that you can read it a little bit better there on the slide. But then our planning division did say, okay, and what's the zoning equivalent? So if we were to rezone it today, what matches, what do we have in our code right now? What type of zoning district would be proposed that fits within those categories? We also thought it might be helpful to take a look at what's happening in the neighborhood around each of these sites, just so you get a feel for the lay of the land there as well. And so it just kind of did, this is just my thought is probably 2 blocks out, just giving you the information about what that looks like. And so the average lot sizes around the high school are a little bit over 11,000 square feet. Again, that is an average, so some are smaller, some are larger. And the zoning there is split between R1 and R2, with more of it being an R2 zoning, but not a whole lot more. So the options, if this were being looked at for a different type of use than a school, the building itself could be adaptively reused and follow anything that's allowed by our zoning code. Again, this being an R1 area, there are a variety of things that are allowed. Somebody could choose to redevelop the site, and they could demolish a portion of it or all of it, put up all houses, or just demolish a portion of it and convert some of it, that type of thing. Or we could have an application, which we have not had, so I just want to make that clear. There's no application on the books, but if somebody wanted to rezone the property, we'd go through that rezoning process and review the comprehensive plan as well. And that is a public process, so that would have to become before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. Moving on to the Mercy One Cedar Falls Medical Center site. This is owned by the city and leased to the hospital. It's approximately 18.5 acres. It's bordered by Division Street on the west, College Street on the east, 4th Street on the north. And this site operated as a municipal hospital from its founding until 1996. There was a lease with Covenant that started in 1997. That is when they purchased the operations, so the equipment and the supporting items were purchased, but the city continued to own the building and the grounds. We just completed the initial 25-year term on that agreement, and it provides for a renewal in 5-year increments that was done around 2022. The zoning for this site is R3. So in the R3 zoning district, the allowed uses, our zoning code right now is cumulative. So in the R3, you're allowed to do R2 items. In R2, you're allowed to do R1, so forth. So R3 also allows multiple dwellings. So that's where you start to see apartment buildings in R3 districts sometimes, not all the time. Institutions, hospitals, that type of thing. Just as a reminder, R1 then allows 1 and 2 unit dwellings, churches, schools. So those are all allowed under the R3 district because it allows the R1 uses as well. Our future land use map for this area does call for this site as a civic use. Again, the base zoning being R3, there could be somebody that comes in and develops under the R3 because that is the right now. So if they would meet all the R3 requirements, and maybe they could do a subdivision, but they'd still meet the R3 zoning requirements. But if that were proposed to be changed, well, then we'd have to look at the future land use map as well. I did just include a snippet from the comprehensive plan that says that civic uses include churches, schools, libraries, that type of thing. And so that is what's permitted, as well as anything in the R3 district. And then again, the table showing the types of residential uses in our land use, future land use map, and what that equates to in terms of zoning today. For this area, the lot sizes are slightly smaller than in the high school area for kind of a 2-block perimeter around the site. They are 8,600 square feet for the most part. Again, they're going to vary. The zoning in this area is all R2 surrounding this R3 site. The options are similar to the options that I mentioned for the high school site. Same types of options here. Somebody could choose to adaptively reuse the building. It could be an apartment building, for example, because that's allowed in the R3 district. Redevelopment of the site could be proposed. We have nothing before us right now, but that is a possibility. And then a rezoning and a comprehensive plan amendment could be considered. And again, that has to go through a public process. So I thought I'd wrap up by just providing the council of where the council landed at goal setting. This is what's in our capital improvement plan in terms of the timeline of various projects that the planning division is working on, and it shows you where the high school and the Mercy One project fits. Like I said, fiscal 26 and 27 is where we have this project slated at this point to do a visioning and then following that up with zoning. And the map just shows you then how kind of the pieces of the puzzle, is what I call it, start to come together in terms of looking at larger neighborhood areas and slowly looking at the whole city. So with that, I'll wrap it up. The new high school is opening in the fall of 2024. The former site will continue to be used as an educational institution, and that's what we're hearing at this time. A new hospital, while it's been discussed, we still don't have any information about a timeline for that, or when or if that's really happening. And so we continue to just try to plan for the future as we have the time and funding to do so. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Sheets, and open it up to
Mr. Mayor,
questions. Yep.
if I may, Director Sheets, could you remind me, I know we talked a little bit about the high school Mercy One vision plan and stuff at goal setting this year, but that honestly was the first I recalled talking about it. We had some focus on the University Avenue corridor prior to that. Can you let me know, when did this supplant, if before goal setting, or was it just that discussion that started the shift northwest?
Good question. I'd have to go back and look, because I do know that at one time in the CIP, we just had a general visioning and zoning, and we didn't identify different neighborhoods. And you're right, University Avenue was a little bit more in our thinking. So this is the first year in the CIP where we're breaking them out individually.
Okay,
That's what I'm recalling.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think I can get with that. Thank you.
So I know this was, maybe wasn't in your wheelhouse, but I was kind of hoping that someone from the Mercy One would have been here tonight to maybe discuss stuff we don't know, and why don't we know it? Like unknown timeline. And then, you know, there's been some criticism of how the hospital is being run for the city. And again, it's not directed at you, Director, it's my concerns that those aren't being addressed. Or if they're unfounded, then I'd like to hear from those representatives saying, here's how many people we see, here's what we're doing with the building, and here's how we're keeping our technology up. It seems to be kind of something that we're left in the dark on.
That's certainly something that we could try to follow up on. The referral was kind of general, so we kind of
Right.
hoped that we were hitting the mark with the information.
Yeah,
Mr.
quick,
Mayor.
just in defense of Mercy One, this discussion
Right.
had nothing to do with those things. I know we've talked with Mercy One about about this being on
We
tonight.
did let them know that the presentation was happening. They saw a copy of it, as well as the school district.
Yeah, but also that this had nothing to do with the operations of Mercy One.
Yeah,
and
that's
those
too
kind of
bad,
discussions.
because that's how I feel.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I made the referral. Obviously, everybody, I think it was majority, or I think maybe everybody said yes to it, but you answered my intention of the referral, was just to kind of see where we're at and where we're going, and, yeah, so thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, Director Sheets, you mentioned, so we own the building itself, or all of it, or just a portion of it?
Yep.
Or And so if someone were to want to continue to use that building, if the hospital were to vacate, you mentioned like someone might be able to turn it into an apartment building or something. How would that process work?
I don't think that we've totally determined yet, but the city could, like we've done in other projects, do a request for proposals from development firms, and it could run the range of what they propose, whether it's a reuse of existing building or a combination of, or starting over.
And I think one of the things that we've always promised the neighborhood around there is there would be some type of a public process to determine what that would be, whether it's reuse of the building, new use of everything, or, you know, what does that zoning look like? So we've always told the neighbors that there would be a public process.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. And so the reality is then, the two properties are very distinct. You know, we don't own the school, so that property will go, depending upon how the school board goes. This one we'll have a lot of control over because we own it. And we also enter into leases, right? So we can determine who our
Correct.
lessee is, ultimately.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I think too, speaking to some of the construction timeline, that will take, even if we had, say, a commitment today on a new timeline, it'd take a couple of years. So I think that is one point to this conversation, at least being a little ahead of the curve of just knowing when that comes up, at least having everyone level set on what's the current zoning, what's allowed, not allowed. And then Councilmember Schultz, to your point, we can have that conversation. I didn't want to cut that off. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that Mercy One was not expecting that would be something we were asking them to come present on tonight.
Would be good to hear sometime.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Director Sheets, I don't know if you have this detailed scope of this information, but some of the parcels to the northwest of the Sartori property there, I think there was some recent, for lack of a better word, insinuation that we had done something different with that property. Did that used to be part of the Sartori Trust, if you will? Can you speak on whether we've always owned that and it was always within our jurisdiction
Are
to
you,
sell
for
those parcels?
example,
Yeah,
asking
that little
about
reverse.
these?
Correct.
I remember maybe something had come up about, I think, some of the lots, kind of, my mouse is there, kind of in
Yeah.
that area, and I think it was a misunderstanding that the city owned anything there. What was your question again then?
That's what I was just trying to double check if we had some history on that. I think a look at the assessor's site, if I remember correctly, it might have had a change of ownership from Sartori to the individuals that own it, either now or in the last several years. But that was totally within rights of the agreement with Sartori and the trust. There was no, I guess the insinuation was that we sold property we shouldn't have.
Oh,
and we wanted to
I don't think that occurred. I know we looked into that, but it was not founded.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I maybe am off track on that area there. Were there some flooding concerns? Was that a connection, that there was some runoff or some blocked off, particularly this spring and summer when it was so wet?
I'm not recalling hearing of anything. I don't know if Director Schrage heard of anything or not.
I'm not familiar with anything right there.
Any other questions, comments, discussion from council? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Director.
All right.
And moving on to item number 2, resilience plan, overview of the plan elements. And we've got our planner, Thomas, coming to present to us. And kind of same on this, no specific outcomes or votes on what we're looking for action from this. Just wanted to kind of have staff be able to come level set, give all the information of what the plan was, the background, and then kind of see it was a referral item, but then also just looking at, is there any discussion the council wants to have on it? So,
Good evening, council. Yes, this is just an overview of the plan. No real specifics. I included the plan in your packet so you can go back through and look at those. The purpose of the plan was the fact that the world's changing. We're seeing things different. This was going on during the during COVID. So we were trying to deal with something else and keep the community together. Resilience is the act of a community continuing to be prepared, proactive, flexible when things are happening, which we were during COVID. There's a lot of things changed, but the community dealt with it very well. And the purpose of the plan was just to come up with a guide that utilizes existing community plans and actions, but also seeks to get the community involved to identify actions that are needed to improve the prosperity and the stability of the community. Okay, so I'll go over a little of the process. This was an 8-month-long process that started in October 2020. In fact, it was the very first thing I started working on when I started work with the city. And we had 12 online workshops, and they were basically the 6 workshops you see down at the bottom, but they were held at one at sort of a luncheon meeting and one in the evening. There were 6 self-guided workshops. We had some public worksheets that were sent out or were available on the website. And then we wrapped up with a town hall meeting. Okay, so in that plan, it identified several topics, and they've grouped them together under the local economy, community, weather and nature, energy and mobility. And when you see on the slide, the items that are the darkest under each of those were most important to the community. So you see almost everyone that responded to that felt like supporting local businesses and jobs were very important for this plan to address. And then down into the weather and the energy and mobility, you still could see a lot of people had concerns, but you notice that there's some lighter color lines in the same one, and that represents people who didn't seem to think that, in this case, managing social and economic opportunities were as great as some of the others. So we looked at, in the plan, we looked at some of the things the city was currently doing that would be involved in this plan. So there's things, the city was doing a lot of this. This plan just kind of put that information together into one document. We'd started increasing our flood protection in 2010. The downtown levee height was increased in 2019. We maintain a flood buyout program, and we're still doing that right now. Mobility, the city has installed a lot of bike trails. That was one of the things that people I worked with in Alabama said, wow, look at that bike network and look at those trails. So they were very impressed with what Cedar Falls had done. We have a lot of sidewalk and trail projects. The University Avenue project, sidewalk infill projects, we've been having those in the capital improvements plan since 1990. The environment, the city's planted a lot of trees as part of street improvements. They support the Dry Run Creek watershed improvement, and annually they plant an additional 200 trees in the city. Waste reduction, the city has worked to provide remote recycling places throughout the city, and part of that is that it allows, instead of everybody driving through, idling a car in one place, it gives you a chance whenever it's convenient to you to drop it off and leave. So that's another good opportunity. Energy reduction, the Cedar Falls utility has the program of Simply Solar, and actually when they did it in 2016, they were the largest community solar project in the state. Now I think Story County has built one that's about 5.5 megawatts larger. I didn't go through and update everything, but I kind of wanted to check on that because I thought that was really interesting that at the time this was put together, we were the best in Iowa, or had the largest. So now we'll go over a little of the overview. So who would be responsible for executing the plan? Well, the city would be. Cedar Falls Utilities has things they can do, but community members, businesses, organizations can all be part of implementing this by picking up things, doing it on their own. The city and CFU would identify and coordinate some resilience plan actions that talks about facilitating a resiliency network where if people would call and say, how do I go about doing this, we would be able to provide them with resources to do that particular item as it relates to the plan. The plan was, from those original 6 categories or topics, whittled down into 3 categories: local economics and community, weather and nature, and energy and mobility. We'll start with local economics and the community. The plan drivers, and these are really the topics that came forward on the plan that the community felt were most important to be addressed, was to support the local jobs and businesses, retrain and attract business talent, maintain a diversified local economy, provide fair and equitable opportunities, develop some housing options, and maintain and improve community well-being. As far as the local economics and the community agreed on those 3 top resilience issues, as we showed in the graph earlier. And businesses and workers are looking for communities that are prosperous and stable, have good, competent workforce. When I applied for the job up here, it was those things I looked at. What's the park system look like? You know, the trails, all those things that would make me want to move from Alabama to Iowa, and including snow. So, and when it comes to attracting talent, that is very competitive. So businesses trying to attract new talent and aspiring entrepreneurs, get the people entrepreneurs create jobs, and then people who are innovators. And so with some of the wind energy here, there's an opportunity to really focus in on building, maintaining, installing all those types of things. And then to do that, Cedar Falls really needs to be a vibrant community. Downtown is very vibrant. We've got for younger people, College Hill, so there's a lot of things that Cedar Falls offers. The amenities such as the parks, trails, the new riverfront project, and then a diversified local economy where you're seeing I grew up in I guess Waterloo was a company town, and if the companies had a sneeze, then everybody caught the cold. So, looking at diversifying, that's very important for resiliency. Some of the existing opportunities, we have a group of engaged citizens in town. That's one of our resources. We have nice mixed-use neighborhoods or areas. Our waterways and green corridors are very attractive, and then the bike and pedestrian network. As far as clean and renewable energy, with all that the CFU's been doing and where we're located, we could be poised to become a national leader in alternative energy sources such as wind, biofuels. And then it's looking to get an up-and-coming business talent that can work on those particular energy items. And then at last, we have a rich amount of agricultural lands and availability of water, the Cedar River. They're all high-valued resources. As the weather becomes increasingly extreme over parts of the rest of the country, Cedar Falls is poised to become a place where people would consider moving to. It wouldn't be as hot. We don't have as much snow and cold as winters, so those are attractive to other people. Also part of that is attracting the business talent. A lot of younger people, newer talent, look for mixed-use areas. And we have a lot of areas that have that, starting now with mixed use, that could be developed further, which would be an attraction to younger people. I can live here, I can walk to the store, I can walk for dinner. And we show 5 neighborhoods right now that would be really are poised to become a good source of mixed-use neighborhoods. And then a lot of talk about missing middle housing. Typically, when you think of housing, you've got single-family and big apartment complexes. But there's a variety of things in between. Main Street's got 2 or 3 good examples of some missing middle apartment buildings. They're small scale. They fit in on the block with the community. So that's an opportunity. People are looking for that type of housing today. Attracting business talent. We got, as I mentioned before, bikeable, walkable community. We are adding every day to our bike trails, to our paths. We've got marked paths. We've got some that are share roads. But these are all things that attract, and most of you probably see the people riding. There's a lot of bicyclists out there, a lot of people walking. I'm amazed at the number of people walking anytime during the day. So that obviously is an attraction. It's well used. And then finally, another thing to think about is natural resources. Younger people are looking to be back with nature, but not have to mow their own yards. And then blue-green corridors. So our streams and tributaries provide a lot of recreation, bicycle commuting, natural areas that are stormwater management. And then the blue-green corridors that are mentioned, a good example of that is the Center Street project, where we've got stormwater management, we've got trails, we've added some trees. People are enjoying that, and it's a mixture. You can control stormwater, but yet make it beautiful and provide people a place to walk. So that's another thing to go with attracting local talent. Then we go into the weather and the nature. One of the big things is just looking at preparedness for weather. We know it's changing. The temperatures have risen since the 1950s. It's gone up about 1.3 degrees. Indications say it'll continue to warm, but with this, we're starting to get a lot more rainfall, not necessarily over the year, but instead of having 1-inch rains one day, we may have 2 or 3-inch rains. And then we're dealing with trying to get the stormwater runoff. Increased moisture also affects wind speeds. We have had 2 derechos since I've been up here. One of them happened as I was moving. So, that's something that we may continue to see a lot more in the future. Another indication is that the plant hardiness zone, if any of you are gardeners, you recognize the fact that in 1990, Iowa was primarily in a zone 4. And now in 2015, that zone 4 has moved to the northern half of the state, very north part, and into Minnesota, and most of Iowa's in a zone 5, which when I lived in Indiana, we did zone 5 was our zone because there's a lot more snow. things like that. So it's changing. We need to be prepared because of the warmer weather. There's more frequency for stronger storms, and we're not getting it in snow, which is a slower melting process. And again, I'd mentioned that these rainfall events are continuing to increase, and local urban flash flooding is a key factor in that. When a lot of the city's infrastructure in the old part of the city was designed, it was designed on the weather we were seeing at that point. Since then, it's changed. We need to figure out how to deal with that, and that, in essence, will help deal with some of the flash flooding. And if you look at this map, what this basically is saying, most of the city that's not developed to the south and the west drains to Dry Run Creek, which drains to the downtown. So if we can manage that, plan saying if you can manage that water upstream and lessen the runoff, then you can lessen the impact on the other parts of the developed city. Gray stormwater storage costs $20, on average $20 per cubic foot. Some of the green infrastructure, such as bioswales and the blue-green corridors, can cost less than that. And then again, that provides an amenity. People see that, but they don't recognize that, oh, that's part of our stormwater management. And then finally, coming into the energy and mobility, and a lot of this is based upon things that the utilities are currently planning to do and have implemented, and things that people then can do to support that. There's a lot of renewable wind and solar energy, and it's become very popular in the past couple decades. The long-term goal for CFU is to get a competitive cost structure and energy effectiveness plan. When you look at the cost of unsubsidized utilities, everything is subsidized, whether it's wind power, that. But looking at that, onshore wind and utility solar scale are the cheapest to install and to operate. Then we get into gas, combined cycle. I'm not sure what combined cycle is, but I think that's just sitting the gas. Coal, nuclear energy, and then the gas peaking plant, which is basically if there's a strain on your electrical system in the winter because of it being cold, then they can turn up a gas peaking plant to help assist with energy generation of some type. Renewable fuels. There's a demand for natural gas and other liquid fuels, but these can be supplied by biodiesel and other renewables, renewable gas. There are chances to use biomass reactors and native grasses. So these are all things that we're still using that, but we're not drilling from within to get these sources. So that's why it's called renewable. Yes, it's still producing emissions, but we're not bringing more up. We're using what is available out there. Carbon pollution. The CFU's got a goal to become carbon neutral by 2050. And looking at what they've done from 2010 to 2030, they've reduced the carbon dioxide emissions by 45%. Their nitrogen and oxygen compounds have been reduced. Sulfur and oxygen compounds have been reduced by almost 90%. And again, their goal is to be carbon neutral for electricity and gas by 2050. And part of that can be achieved through energy or building efficiency, commercial working with industry, and commercial sites to become more efficient, using lower polluting forms for their electricity and their heating. And then this shows the proposed waste reductions, that if we can get a 2% in waste reduction by 2030, 9% in 2040, that the city by 2050 could reach a target goal of being carbon neutral. But again, it takes everyone. It can't just be the city, can't just be CFU. It's got to be you, me, my neighbors, if we want to do that. And just think about when we do things. the outcome. And now I'm going to talk a little bit just about the plan. We've got the plan drivers, which again were developed from those topics that started out in the public meetings. So the community these were recommended by the community. So there's a list of resilience plan drivers, and under each of those, we went through some of the categories of local economy, local economics, community, weather and nature, energy and mobility. And then there's the action list, which is a little more detail under each of those other categories that talks about different items, what people can do, things like that to put the plan together. And there are actually 68 actions listed in the plan altogether. And so we looked at this sort of what the plan is about and gave a general idea of what some of the recommendations are, some of the things that we could do, who could do them. So it's not just the city has to do it. We can encourage others in the community to do that. So I would be happy to address any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. And open it up to council for questions, discussion.
I'll start. I'm not going to go in. I think everybody's heard me rattle on about this and knows how I feel about the resilience plan. But I'll just touch on a couple of things and try not to trigger anything. So I specifically, when I look at this, at the actual plan, thank you for breaking it down in, to an overview. But I look at what's listed as item number 2 in the actual plan, which in this presentation, or this, our packet tonight, it's page 55. And there's a whole page of folks, and I'm not looking at the council part of it necessarily, but you look at all the community members and professionals that work and or live in Cedar Falls, folks that know things that most of us probably don't know unless you're specifically in those areas. And it just to see it all on paper, how many people, plus all the citizens who came and participated in those workshops, it was a lot of time and talent that was given to this project. So I appreciate that. I just look at this as a tool that we've paid for, we've asked people to come to the table and to help work on. And unfortunately, we've got the tool, but we've never put it in the toolbox. And I know there's some different thoughts of, well, we can just look at it and go as we go. I'm not afraid to say that that's not how I operate. I mean, I want to know that our staff, if we've got something in the tool, potentially in the toolbox, that if this body makes a referral, that our staff can use that tool, and knowing that no matter what it is, it comes before the council. And if there's something that the council or citizens voice concerns of at that time, we can always say, yeah, no, that's not going to work for this. So I don't think that it's a, nothing in here is a must. It's just, it's there to refer to, like many of our other plans, i.e. our strategic plan, things like that. And then it just, I think a big focus of it's, I think the main thing that the most people said in that one slide was they want to make sure they support local businesses. And when you talk about retention and attracting people, I mean, no offense to anyone up here, and there's maybe some youth on this body, but a lot of us are getting to the middle part of our lives, and they're not necessarily talking about attracting us. They're talking about maybe attracting, our kids to stay, or new innovators and thinkers to hopefully call this home. And in this time and in this place, that's pretty important. And so I just want to point that out. And then to me, resilience, maybe I just interpret that it became a dirty word, but like, I hope that we're all resilient. I hope that my resilience to me means you might get knocked down, but you pick yourself up, shake yourself off, you evaluate what might have happened and where you can do better, and then hopefully you're much more prepared and you don't get knocked down quite so hard or maybe at all the next time. So I just, and obviously this is a 7-person body, but I just hope that this council, I think that was the intention when it came up in goal setting, is maybe we just give an opportunity for this body to look at this again.
Thank you, Councilor Dunn. Other discussion? Yep.
Mr. Mayor, first of all, thanks, Kelly. I am so young. I agree with everything that Kelly said. I think that it is important. I know that in the past, looking at this document, has been a lot of information, and then it's kind of like, how do we use this, and what do we do with it? And so I know we're not taking action out of this, although I think I'm saying something that's actiony. But, I think it would be good to potentially establish a group of folks who could look at this again. Not necessarily us, but, some of those same people that are found on that page and some staff, and try to come up with some objectives, like either how we can use the document, if it is something we want to use, like moving forward as a reference document for projects, or are there specific things in the document that maybe we want to move onto our goals list that we haven't considered, or maybe there's things on there that we're already doing and we could say, hey, we're doing those things. Anyways, I think there's just a ton of different ways that we could go, but it might be good to establish a group, a committee, whatever you want to call it, task force, to actually start to look into this and potentially move some things forward so that we can, move on from reviewing it and just knowing what it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Chrisman. Other council thoughts, discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I think there's some thoughts bouncing around in my head that I didn't bother to put to paper yet, but I think it's worth noting that along with some previous mention, I think Councilmember Cruz might have mentioned at a previous meeting that we wanted to review all of the goal setting quarterly. I would argue that it doesn't take all of us together in a subcommittee or a task force to review those points. We can each individually take responsibility and say, hey, these are items that I want to make sure that we all attend to. I've viewed this resilience plan in that same fashion. I believe we all want to be resilient. There's perhaps a vantage point that we have different opinions about how we get to that place. I don't think any of us need to see this as a contentious thing. For a couple years prior, it has not been fully adopted. It has been filed. So it was received and filed, but not approved and adopted. From my vantage point, because there were some items in there that I didn't want acted upon. So the recommendation was, let's pull some items out, potentially as council members, that we feel need to be given due focus. Maybe they're items that are community members. Maybe they are CFU items that we want to highly recommend, or maybe they are city-run items that we need to take and adopt and set staff hours toward. But it's been in that position for over 2 years now, where anybody, including previous mayors, could have brought forward items from the plan that was well-worked by a diverse group of people to take action upon. So I think there is still a course of attack for some of these items that need to be brought forward that doesn't include waiting for the whole of council to be rolled over so that we can just adopt the whole thing, fire sale. So I would think that that's something that I would encourage new council members and existing, if they want to see items brought forward, that we can selectively bring items for action through any referral. We have a mechanism for that action. And I think we could get going on some of these things that are needed without any further delay. But bringing them forward individually can happen any time in the past 2.5 years, and thus far has not.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, I understand what Councilman Ganfield's saying, but here's the thing that I have a problem with that plan. When we some of these, any project in our community may have something from this document pertains to. And I guess at most plans, you do adopt, and then they're there. And then staff knows that, yes, this was worked on, and it's now in our, I don't even want to know what I want to say. It's there for staff to work through. I guess I don't see how that's feasible. As a person who's been through this whole thing, I may not know when Kelly's working her 40-hour a week and I make a referral on, hey, I want to see what we can do to make this area be the best and improve this area. I may not realize that there's some kind of tool or recommendation in this document or any of the other documents that we have, because I'm not the one actually doing the work of writing up the proposal. So while I understand what Councilman Ganfield's saying, I don't think that is the reality of how these types of documents work. That's why I don't, if it's received and filed, so each time there's an actionable item in our community, then I guess from what I'm hearing, it's my job or anyone else who might think this is important to make sure that we think to say, hey, I've reviewed this again, and make sure you do this one actionable, do this thing. That's not, I feel like that's not the best way to use this document, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, if I can kind of speak, because I think from having just watched a lot of the council meetings last year, but then talking with everybody on this is kind of goes back to that conversation, what does adopt mean? I think more from a staff side versus a receive and file. And to your point, Councilor Ganfield, it was received and filed, which I think to some means, okay, we'll look at this, and if there's pieces of it that make sense, let's move forward with them, which I think to some that's what adopt means. So I think somewhat we come back to that conversation of when we adopt this versus receive and file, what are we saying? Because I know, at least how I perceive your guys' two comments, is it's pretty similar if you want to look at the document, which items do we want to move forward with. I think, and Stephanie or someone could probably speak to the specific, or Thomas, to what's in the document. One of the recommendations, I believe, was essentially kind of a committee or task force to review the plan, continue to make sure pieces are being acted on. I don't know if I have that specifically pulled up, but.
And what items were involved during that period on an annual basis? So it's just sort of a monitor of how the plan's being used.
Yep. And if I understand what you're saying correctly, Councilor Dunn, is that you don't want it to be based on this group having to bring it forward. You're hoping staff, just within their own wherewithal, would be making sure to bring these things forward and act on them as they become relevant. And
I just want it to function like every other plan that we've ever had. Like, this is not, I feel like most plans up until the last few years have traditionally been put in place to where there can be worked. And I guess where my frustration lies is, even if staff uses that, or whoever in the community uses that, it eventually all comes back before this body. And if that proposal is not something that this body or planning, whoever is in charge of the public process of it, then we don't have to do it. But in the meantime, it's just sitting there, and unless someone is actively diving in for every item, to my knowledge, it's not being utilized. And I'm not saying that, I know things are being done. I know CFU's doing lots of great things. I know the University of Northern Iowa is doing lots of great things.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah. Councilmember Cruz.
So it's interesting, Councilperson Dunn, what you're describing kind of contradicts itself as you describe it, because you're saying when we receive and file, nobody's doing anything with it, and it just sits there. But then you said CFU's doing lots of things and very actively, and you and I and so on. I'm one of the people that believe receive and file puts it out there as an encyclopedia for us to use, or Google, let's go Google or whatever, and you find out through looking at this if there's an item in there you want to pull forward and adopt and use that one component. We don't have to adopt the entire thing because there's going to be differences of opinion between the 7 of us, between staff and us, between the citizens and us. So item by item, we can pull something forward, and that's, in my mind, what staff's prerogative can be at any time. if there's enough interest from the community, somebody comes up and speaks in front of us during public comment section, and some of us say, yeah, that's a good idea, let's bring it forward. So it gives us the best flexibility within a budget that has to adapt and change to economic times, monthly, yearly, and so on. So the way we have it set up here, we can actively use all components of this. So,
Mr. Mayor, I'm just curious for the two of you. Do you guys know, like when someone brings something forward, do you just know like, oh, that's in the resilience plan? Just curious.
say it again.
Like if someone came forward and said, hey, we really want to connect the sidewalk here, you know, like, are you like, oh, that's in the resilience plan? Nice. Or does that cross your mind?
I think you're asking, are we self-aware of what's in there?
Right.
when we're
Like,
using it?
because to me, it's like, I don't know what is in it in its entirety, being totally honest. So like, I need staff or whomever to say like, this is a item in the resilience plan. But like if someone just came forward and presented a project and it was in the resilience plan, if they never made any reference to that, I would not know. So
That's,
do
I
you
don't
know
know.
that?
it doesn't necessarily have to be pointed out in the resiliency plan. It comes forward on the merits of whatever the topic is.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is then, if we don't specifically reference it, then we don't know if we're doing something in it. So I think the point would be, we need to somehow establish a process to confirm when we are doing something, is that like meeting a check in the resilience plan, or are we not doing a project that we should be doing based off of the input of the community members that responded and asked us to put this together?
Well, and it does kind of, and Ron, if I can ask you to jump in here, I know we kind of had the same conversation on the College Hill Vision Plan, is how does staff view, kind of right now, just level set, where does staff view this with how it is as it's been received and filed, versus what action if council were to move forward with pieces of this or adopt it, and what's the difference that staff's looking for? Because the thing I've always seen talking with everybody is, at this point, it seems like receive and filed was given also with the direction of just, and whether it was unintentional or intentional, seems like the way it's been interpreted is don't do anything with this. Don't build priorities around it. Don't kind of move initiatives forward. Can you just kind of speak to where it's at with staff?
So that's a pretty big question, because the resilience plan's been a little bit of a hot potato. You know, I think initially it was the contract to develop it was 4-3 by the city council. So moving forward, we knew that it was going to be a little bit of a contentious issue. It ultimately, if I remember correctly, was adopted, and then about a year ago was unadopted, if I remember correctly. So I could be mistaken, but so staff looked at this and they use it as a reference, I think, but they also want to be clear that, you know, there was a council that maybe didn't want it referenced. I know there are some times when we're putting together, whether it's grant applications or other types of things like that, that we do need. There's questions specifically, hey, does your community have a resilience plan or something like that adopted? And so it is a little bit of a tool that way. So,
Mr. Mayor, I'm glad you put the correlation between this and the College Hill Vision Plan, because this is really kind of the same thing that I'm looking at right now. We had a plan that was received and filed and then didn't get touched for a couple of years. We've got this one that's similarly in the same spot. But what we found with a path moved forward, at least a compromised path moved forward with the College Hill Vision Plan, was that we had a collective conversation, pulled out a few key items and gave staff some direction. So maybe that is, if we can't blanketly say, this document, yep, we want to do it all, then I think we need to, I know you're not looking for an action, but rather than sitting here and debating what receive and file means, or whether someone does or doesn't know what's in this document, I don't understand why as this body we don't just pick out a few items of this and start moving forward with some direction to staff, because otherwise they're sitting there with their tails in the wind. We haven't given them direction.
Yep. And I think just to use that as an example for the College Hill Vision Plan, we did adopt the vision plan and then had staff with direction come back with your recommendations on specifically the steps, next actions on this. Because I think that's, from my standpoint, working with staff, that's the biggest thing for this whole thing, is just they're looking for direction on which aspects of this do we move forward with. And I think the day-to-day stuff we are doing, the sidewalk enhancements and some of the stormwater management, we're doing some of those projects, but it's more the bigger picture of, are we putting resources towards some of these areas, emphasizing them? That's the direction I think staff is looking for. So regardless of all those conversations, that's what we're trying to get to, is how do we make sure and give some clear direction?
It's kind of ironic, this afternoon I was digging through a pile of papers for something else for work, and I came across the background slide, which, we could see it with my printer line through the middle. But the resiliency plan was not ever fully adopted. It was town hall meeting, April 2022, council committee presentation and discussion, May 2022, received and filed June 20th, 2022. So it wasn't adopted and then unadopted. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I know Ron and I had talked a little bit about that. Just thinking that might be the case. And so even though he said not looking for action tonight, and looking for direction, just generally trying to get a sense of where council's at on how we want to look at moving this forward.
Mr. Mayor, I do think it's worth mentioning that it's not just, within the document, there's recommendations for, for all people of our community, not just us. So, to just go through and just say what is important to us, I think that's why it might be good to have a more comprehensive review of what's currently being done and what is happening. So that way, if there are things that we want to work on, we can make sure we're not doing work that's already being done by a different group.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
question for Administrator Gaines. Am I perceiving this correctly, that in the absence of some direction from this body or from what Councilmember Chrisman is describing, there won't be any action on this by staff because we don't have any direction for you to work on something?
I would say there's some truth to that. There's items in the plan that will come up through other avenues, though. And what those, I can't think of a specific example right now, but those will also be voted on by this body, one way or another, so.
Mr. Mayor?
We're done.
I think a good example of that is when it was said I contradict myself. I mean, CFU is doing things, that's why it says all folks must come to the table, but CFU does many of these things on a daily basis. And obviously if there's a need for action from the council, we vote on that, but they're working constantly to try to make us better and more resilient.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
I think that's kind of the observable outcome here. Even though it has been filed, there are people doing measures that are also highlighted in here through those other methods. We have, LED conversions going on. Just going back through, we're taking energy efficiency steps through every area of the city council without us having to approve this document in whole. There is merit to saying, hey, if we are in agreement of these 9 of 10 points, we should put it forward. But there were some items in there that were not in agreement for people to take marching orders from. That's why it was never fully adopted. It is interesting, there's a measure in there that says we move all of our CFU vehicles over to hybrid or electric. Does that mean because we haven't adopted this plan that they can't buy an electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle? Absolutely not. They're going to continue with what makes sense even without this being adopted. So there's part of me that says we should know what's in this document enough to say, hey, I'm for it or against it. And having studied it a couple years ago, there were items I wasn't comfortable with yet, stating we have to, we have to make sure we make all efforts to keep our wagon hitched to this horse. We could take maybe 80% of the plan and work on it, but there were a couple items that we weren't ready to nix before adopting. So that's why it's been sitting there waiting for particular items. I do think we are working on resilient community measures. Obviously, we are wanting to be attractive to talent and residents. I mean, there's lots of initiatives that we are taking action on without this being adopted yet. And I do think the right way for this to come forward would probably be subservient to the strategic plan and this year's goal setting to see, okay, what are we pulling from this to put into our goal document strategically?
Mr. Mayor? I want to thank you for the presentation. I certainly have all the information I need to continue thinking about the resilience plan. We're not in a position to take any action tonight. We have processes in place for that to happen. So thank you for your presentation.
Any other council discussion on this? All right, seeing none, we will call this meeting adjourned, and we will be back at 7 o'clock for our regularly scheduled city council meeting. Thank you, everyone.